guys. Well, good morning. What is that? You all okay? I have to say, I don't really feel like I need to add anything more to this morning because it's just been so encouraging already, hasn't it? Just hearing of how God's been at work, and even just this kind of common theme as you guys have been picking up on it this morning. It feels like God is definitely speaking through this word of faithfulness this morning, and that He wants to come and meet us wherever we are, and remind us of His faithfulness, His goodness to us. And as I was looking just at the Bible passage that I'm just going to be sharing a little bit with you, because I hope that you will be hearing that as well, as we hear from God's word, that He is so faithful. His word, it stands forever, it is alive, it is active, and He wants to speak to us today. It's nice to be in person with you guys. I think I've been with you online in the past, which all you see is like names on Facebook and things like that, and you don't actually get to see people in person. So we thank God for technology in a way that it meant we could continue gathering throughout this whole season. But isn't it good just seeing faces and being in the room together and worshipping as well? I love that this morning. Just very briefly about myself and who I am. You might notice there's not just me here this morning. I've got my wife Lydia with me, and our little baby Mally down there. She's 4 months old, yeah, she is. She'll probably be shouting me down and reminding me that I'm going on for too long as well. But yeah, we're currently based in Cardiff, living in Riverside in Cardiff, based in a church called Grace Church Cardiff. I work with Bible Society, which is an amazing kind of charity that's responsible both for distributing Bibles all over the world, in some of the hardest places in the world, as well as doing a lot of work here on the ground, trying to help people have real confidence in the Bible, to read it for themselves, to love it, to feed off it, and then to be a people who share it as well, believing that it speaks today, that as people engage with the Bible, their lives are changed for good. So that is what I do. You are catching me at a funny transition moment, actually. We're not going to be down in South Wales for much longer. Yeah, I know, we're feeling the pinch of it. The sadness of it is we're going up to North Wales. And I know I'm getting some head shakes there. I'm from North Wales originally. I'm from Bala in North Wales. And for you guys, some of you might be familiar with the land and may not. North Wales is a particularly needy place in many ways. There are many towns and areas where there's desperate need for the gospel. There's desperate need for churches to be planted that have life in them, that are missional and engaging with their communities, and that there's so few of them. And we've just sensed the last few years God kind of pulling us and calling us, and we bought a house up in a town called Blaenau Festiniog. Some of you might know Blaenau, a slate mining town that, in many ways, desperately needs a thriving church there. And so we're going on a church planting adventure, and we pray as we move in and embed ourselves in the community, build relationships and bridges with people, that we might be planting a church there one day. So really appreciate your prayers there, and appreciate just prayers for God to be preparing hearts already. We're going with another couple, which has been so encouraging, but we're aware it's going to be tough. It's going to be hard ground, and especially in the Welsh-speaking context, kind of my kind of upbringing and background. There's a lot of apathy towards the gospel, and we just need God to come and transform things there. So that's where we're at. That's a little bit of who I am. We're going to be looking at a Bible passage. We're going to be in Isaiah 55 is where we're going to be. And Sam just told me that I get to basically just share my heart with you guys, and this has been a passage that has just been burning within me for a few months by now. So if you do have Bibles, it'd be great to follow along. If not, as in you can just listen to me read here, and we'll go from there. So Isaiah 55, verse 1. Come, all you are thirsty, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come buy and eat. can buy wine and milk without money and without cost? Why spend money on what is not bread and your labour on what does not satisfy? Listen to me and eat what is good, and you will delight in the richest of fare. Give ear and come to me. Listen that you may live. I will make an everlasting covenant with you, my faithful love promised to David. See, I have made him a witness to the peoples, a ruler and commander of the peoples. Surely you will summon nations you know not, and nations you do not know will come running to you because of the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, for he has endowed you with splendor. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call on him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake their ways and the unrighteous their thoughts. Let them turn to the Lord, and he will have mercy on them, and to our God, for he will freely pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. As the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return to it without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater, so is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it. Can I pray as we just get stuck into that there? Father God, we thank you for your word. We thank you that it speaks to us. We thank you for your faithfulness to us. Thank you for the stories that we've already heard this morning, of the way that you are at work in our lives today. Lord, thank you that today you want to speak to us. We pray even now, as we look at your word, you will be changing things. You will not let us stay the same. But as we leave this morning, we will be lifted up if we're feeling down. We will be refreshed if we're feeling weary. We would come to the waters and find real life in you. And we love you, Lord. Amen. So I want to bring a message today called The Invitation, Our Calling. So the invitation, our calling. Now, I don't know when you look back on the first moment you had during this time when you experienced something resembling normal again this year. What was it? Did you have a moment where you just started doing something because you were allowed to all of a sudden, and then you thought, wow, this is refreshingly normal. This is great that I get to actually do this again. I don't know what it is. Perhaps, as in Moses mentioned there, for me it was going to the gym for the first time in a while. That was a refreshingly normal moment. Maybe it was just jumping on the bus and heading to town and meeting with a friend. Maybe it was going out for dinner, or I don't know, as in I've had breakfast in Wetherspoons recently with Sam Johnson, so maybe something like that as well. I don't know what it is, but I'm guessing you guys have had that experience recently and just thought to yourselves maybe, just this kind of relief of finally we seem to be coming out of this. And I know the road is a bit longer, but there is that moment, isn't there, that it feels like we're finally coming out of this. Now, in the story I've just read to us there, from Isaiah chapter 55, the words he's speaking to is to a people who are also coming out of something. They also were coming out of a season that they'd been in. And that season had been a season of exile. So as I was writing to Israel, who for 70 years and more had been a people living in exile. Now in the Bible story we hear of that, of these Israelites being dragged to Babylon, being torn apart from their families, removed from Jerusalem and forced to live in a foreign land. They'd experienced 70 years away from any kind of normality. 70 years away from friends, 70 years away, crucially, from Jerusalem, where the temple was, where the presence of God was. And so they were finally coming out of it. Now, can you imagine how they were feeling at the time? Can you imagine how it was coming out of 70 years away from any kind of normality? 70 years away from what they felt was the presence of God. What words could Isaiah write that could be of any encouragement to these people? Because can you imagine where they were? Can you imagine the disappointment that they would have felt? Perhaps the abandonment even from God himself they might have felt. I'm guessing they probably felt a bit let down and a bit burnt out, if I'm honest. So Isaiah, he's writing with those people in mind. A forgotten people, an abandoned people, a frustrated people, a burnt out people. And he writes to them, and what I'm assuming here is that yes, Israel might have been coming out of a literal exile, but for many of us today, doesn't it feel like we're coming out of a form of exile as well? Isn't this story, Israel's story, a little bit like ours as well? And so my question is, what are we like coming out of this at the moment? Perhaps you may just be relieved that this is all done with, and you're just ready to get on with life again. But perhaps you may be feeling that same sort of feeling as the Israelites were feeling. Disappointed. Maybe you feel like giving up already. Maybe you do feel burnt out. Maybe you feel done with God. Because after all, where has he been in the midst of all of this? See, Israel's experience of exile is in some ways like ours. And that's why this passage, these words of Isaiah have been burning on my heart, because I can see the resonance of where we're at today as well. And if we are to hear these words again, what we're going to find is an invitation that if we respond to the invitation, then it can change everything for us today, wherever we're at, whatever we've been through in this past season. If we hear this invitation, and if we respond to the invitation, I believe it can change things for us. So I guess the question is, what is the invitation? What are we being invited into here in the words written by Isaiah? Well, did you hear them in verses 1 to 3? This is what Isaiah says. Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters. And you who have no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why spend money on what is not bread, and your labour on what does not satisfy? Listen to me, and eat what is good, and you will delight in the richest affair. Give ear and come to me. Listen, that you may live. To who and to what is the invitation? That is the question to ask as we were reading those words there. To who and to what is the invitation? Well, did you hear it there? We hear that the invitation is to all those who are thirsty. Now, what do we mean by those who are thirsty? Do we mean physical thirst? Well, I think this idea of thirst is bigger than just that. This idea of thirst in the Bible often is associated with a spiritual thirst, with a deep thirst. It's this thirst for more in life. It's this thirst for a life without, I don't know, when you enter your bed at night and you hit your head on the pillow and you just feel that pain of emptiness within you, and you think, is there better than this? Is there more to life than this? This thirst could be a thirst for love, a thirst for someone to finally value me, to give me what I am looking for. It could be a thirst for just better. I don't know if you find yourself scrolling through your phones or maybe watching the news at night and just thinking to yourselves, surely there has to be better than this. This is what the Bible means by thirst. It's this thirst for more, for better, for something deeper and greater. So we hear the thirsty are invited, but we also hear those who have no money are invited as well. So what do we mean by this? Well, in the original context, writing to the Israelites at the time, this idea of being poor in Hebrew both means, yes, a financial poverty, but also it brings this idea of being an outsider. So if you are described as a poor, you're kind of an outsider at the time. And that is what Isaiah is trying to convey here, is that the invitation is to those, yes, who have no money, but also the invitation is to those who feel like they're on the margins, to those who feel like they've been pushed aside, to those who feel like they've been overlooked, to those people who don't know when the paycheck may be arriving, or to those who feel like they just have nothing to offer because they've been overlooked for so long. To those who feel like no one cares about them, Isaiah says, you're included in this invitation. And then the final kind of people we hear that are invited into this invitation. Do you see it there? To those who are labouring, to those who are working without them receiving anything for their labour. Now, I don't know what comes to your mind when you think of this term, labouring. I admit, growing up in Bala, North Wales is a pretty rural area. I was not from a farming family, but many of my friends were farmers. And I remember one time being invited to help out when it was shearing season. And I was asked not to shear a sheep because that is ridiculously hard. I don't know if you've ever tried that. That is what you call labour right there when you're shearing a sheep. But they're not just doing one, they do hundreds in a day. It's incredible. I was wrapping wool, that was my role then. So they'd shear the sheep and then I would have to wrap the wool. And that in and of itself felt like labour. It was brutal all day long without stop, constantly at work. And I remember finishing the day absolutely spent. I never actually tried it ever again because that was enough labour for me. But I remember finishing that day absolutely spent. But there was also that feeling of being satisfied because you could see something for what you had done. You could see that your work, your labour had led to something. But did you see what Isaiah says here? Who are invited? Well, it's to those who are labouring. But then did you see here? They labour for that which does not satisfy. They do not finish the end of the day with a satisfied feeling within them of, I can see what my work has led to and it is good. No, rather they are constantly at work but never receiving the very thing they're working so hard to get. Now that could be us today. That could be us working and labouring as hard as we can just to be a success in life today. I don't know if you found that, just working and working but never receiving what you're looking for. Or maybe to be liked, to constantly be chasing after the approval of others, for people to just think that I am a good person, and to find that that does not satisfy because I always end up letting someone down. Or maybe it could be to matter, or to be enough for someone or to people. If you are in that type of category, the invitation is for you, to you as well. And so what is the invitation? To the thirsty, to the poor, to the outsider, to the forgotten, to the labouring, to the unsatisfied. What is the invitation? Well, verse 3, did you hear it there? The invitation is to stop with the work, to come, to listen, and then to live. That is the invitation, to live, to life, and to real life. We've been hearing again about that this morning, haven't we? This faith-filled, full life that does not leave you empty, but that fills you fully and forever. That is the invitation for us. Now, to a people who would have known the Bible story, because in Israel they would have grown up with the scriptures, they would have heard the story of the Bible constantly told to them as children, they would have known when God speaks these words and he talks about, I will make an everlasting covenant with you. That would have really hit home to them at the time. And it feels like to us it kind of doesn't, because we weren't grown up in the same sort of culture. But if we do go back to the beginning of the Bible story, what we see right at the start is God making this beautiful world. And what he does in this beautiful world is he makes a beautiful garden. And he plants people in there. And he puts people in there to worship him, to work in the garden, to cultivate it, to make it even more beautiful. and to enjoy all the good things that he's given to them. The Bible speaks about a river that flowed in that garden, and that river brought life to everything and everyone there. But then if you're to turn the page, the beginning of the story, you then turn the page, and what do you find? Genesis 3. And in Genesis 3, we see people turning away from God. We see humans rebelling, and instead of then choosing to worship God and to enjoy all the good things he'd given them, they choose to elevate themselves above God. They think they know better, and therefore they turn their back on him and on his good and loving rule and reign over their lives. And so what happens? Well, we see that they have to leave the garden. That water of life is no longer available, and instead there's this human condition that we all share. This deep drought within us all that thirsts for something better, yet we seem to not be able to find it anywhere. The people were left in a wilderness, and we feel like we might be there as well. But again, if you follow the Bible story, and it's amazing, guys, when you read kind of the Old Testament story, it is a story of God not giving up on his people. We've been talking about that word faithfulness, haven't we? That is exactly what faithfulness means. It is God, despite the people turning their backs away from him, despite them constantly wanting to do away with God, not listening to him, not trusting him or taking him by his word, God remains faithful. He does not give up on them. And so what does he do? He speaks words and promises to them. That word covenant, that is what it means. He promises things to Israel. And what does he promise? He promises that one day, I'm going to bring you back to me. I am going to fill that deep drought within you. I am going to satisfy you. I will make a way back to myself and to the garden, is what God says. And so to a people coming out of exile, this is what they needed to hear. It's what we need to hear as well today. God says, remember my promises. Remember my covenant. What is it? It is everlasting. It does not depend on you. It does not depend on how well you measure up or qualify. No, my covenant is everlasting. It is forever. My word, it will not fail. And so God says to Israel, one thing he asks of them, remember my words, remember what I've promised, because I'm not going to go back on what I have promised. And so for us today, we need to hear that, but we can actually go on better than Israel. Because what can we look back on? We can look back on the coming of Jesus, can't we? They were looking forward to a day when God was going to come good on his promises. What we can do is we can look back on a day when God came good on his promises. Because Jesus literally is God coming good on his promises. When he enters this world, what did Jesus do? He came and brought this invitation fully to us as people. He came bringing a water of real life to us. Have you ever noticed on the cross, in the crucifixion narrative, when Jesus hangs there on the cross, he says these words, doesn't he? He says, I am thirsty. Now, of course, Jesus wasn't he? He would have been physically thirsty. It was the most brutal physical pain imaginable. And yet, the physical pain of Jesus was not anything in comparison to the spiritual pain he was going through at the time of being separated from God his Father, personally being in loving relationship from the beginning of time. And so when he says, I'm thirsty, yes, there's physical thirst, but actually he says it to show what the cross is achieving for us all. Because as Jesus thirsted on the cross, he does that so that we don't have to anymore. When Jesus on the cross takes what he does is he takes on our death so that then we can have his life. Jesus on the cross, what happens? He's exiled. He is separated from God so that we then can come home. He's abandoned on the cross so that we then can know love. That is what the cross achieves. It's this great swap that happens. The drought within us, Jesus experiences, so that we can experience his water of real life. And have you noticed those famous words of Jesus in John 7:37? He says, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink." Anyone who is thirsty. God's promises is for anyone and everyone. If you are thirsting, if you feel like you are an outsider pushed to the margins, if you feel like you're labouring and yet not receiving what you're working so hard for, Jesus is saying here, look, I am what you're looking for. In me is the water of real life. Now, I don't know how you guys find that invitation kind of being kind of received by you guys. Like I know when we hear things, we often have filters that kind of filter things out, and we kind of then make a way for us to think that, well, yes, that's nice, and that could be maybe for some people, but surely God isn't talking to me really here. We find invitations like this hard because I think often we live in a world of flaky and fragile relationships, don't we? We live in a world where we have experienced people promising a lot and yet letting us down. We live in a world where if we do or say one wrong thing, that could be it for us. There could be no way back. Our culture does guilt really well, but it doesn't do redemption at all, really, does it? And so because we live in this culture, we hear these words from Jesus, but we think, surely not. Surely he can't be inviting me, because if he really saw me, if he really knew me, if he knew who he was inviting, he wouldn't go anywhere near me. If he knew my past, if he knew my present struggles, Jesus wouldn't be inviting me. And if you're struggling even just hearing that invitation right now, there are words here from Isaiah that I think they can change everything. Because what Isaiah is trying to say is, God, he isn't like people. He doesn't function like the people in your life today. Did you hear it in verse 8? I think these are some of my favourite verses in the Bible. Verse 8, God says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Do you pick up on what God's trying to say here? What he's trying to say is, there is not a category that you can put me in. My love cannot have a human category for it. My thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are not your ways. My ways are higher than the heavens, are higher than the earth. My love is greater and deeper and bigger than anything you can imagine. So don't think of me as just a regular person in your life that will be disappointed or let down by your struggles or by your actions. God is saying, no. I'm not like other people. I am God, and my love exists in a category that is above any human category of love. That's a pretty big thing to be saying, but it is true. And that is why, as we come out of this, God is saying to you this morning, look, however much you've struggled over the past season, however great your struggle might be even right now, however much you feel like you've been forgotten and abandoned, God says, I haven't forgotten you. God says, I will not run out of love for you. God says, I will not drop you like other people might have. I will not cancel you. And he says, I certainly do not regret the cross of Jesus either. Because it's through the cross that we can have this guarantee that that love will remain faithful forever. His word became true. It became good on the cross. And therefore we can look back to that. And if we struggle with thinking how God views us today, all we've got to do is look back and look to Jesus. And therefore, when we come out of this time, and as we're coming out of this time, we can have this certain knowledge and understanding that I am deeply loved. Now, for a person like me, that is the greatest news on earth. because I am constantly worrying about what others make of me. I'm constantly thinking and trying to matter and to be enough. And here is Jesus saying, look, before you lift a finger, you are loved, and you are loved forever. So that is the invitation to us. But then, as we finish, there's an amazing thing that happens in the Bible. We see it through the whole story. God invites people in, but then he does so to send us out as well. There is always an invitation in, and then there's a call out as well. You see it through the whole pattern. Do you remember the story of Abraham, right at the beginning of the Bible story? God meets him and he blesses him, and he says, and I'm going to bless you so that you can be a blessing to the nations. God meets Moses, this broken, wandering man in the wilderness at the burning bush. He meets with him, he affirms him, but then he says, go to Pharaoh and lead my people out. And Jesus even himself, doesn't he? He says, as the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. It is a pattern throughout the whole Bible story. If you are a follower of Jesus, you have been invited in to this life and love of God, but then you're also called to take that invitation out as well. And where do we see that here? Well, we see it in verse 5. What is our call? Well, verse 5 here. Surely you will summon nations you know not, and nations you do not know will come running to you, because of the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, for he has endowed you with splendor. See, Israel's call here, isn't it? Is to go to the nations that do not know God, and to call on them to turn to him so that they too might live. This was not an exclusive invitation. This was the most inclusive invitation there could be. This is for anyone and everyone, every nation, to those who do not know God, to come back to him. So the invitation, it really has become our calling as well. But just think about this for a second. Think about the sort of people that would have been hearing these words. We've been discussing it already, haven't we? They were a people who were battered and bruised. They were a people who really felt like they had nothing more to give. They were a people that were just thinking, just when I get back to Jerusalem, I'm just going to try and survive and just get through this time. There are people who just felt totally burnt out. So isn't it amazing that God is saying, I am calling you. Israel, battered and bruised, fearful as you may be, I am calling you. And that is what God is doing to us today as well. If we are in that space, if we feel burnt out, or if we feel like we have nothing left to give, or that we're just simply not good enough for sending, I think what God is trying to say to us here is, if you're in that place, you are right where he wants you to be. Because when we are feeling that fear, when we're feeling inadequate, that is when God can meet us and give us his courage to go in his power rather than our own. And I feel like that is a word for the church. What do we need more than ever in this moment? We need courage. We need to be a courageous people, a courageous church. But where does courage come from? Does it come from within? Does it come from looking at ourselves and trusting our own performance or our own abilities? No, I think Isaiah shows to us where the source of real, true courage is. In verse 10, this is what he says. As the rain and the snow come down from heaven, and do not return to it without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish, so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater. Verse 11. So is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it. Do you hear what God is saying to this fearful people coming out of exile and yet being sent by God to the nations? What is he saying to them? He's saying, as sure as when the rain falls down on the earth and brings new life from it, so sure you can be when my word goes out, when you take the invitation, that there will be new life that comes from that. That is a phenomenal promise from God, isn't it? That my word, it will not fail, is what he's saying. It doesn't rely on you. You're called to be faithful in inviting people to it, but your work isn't to achieve the purposes of God. He will do it. He will do it through his word. And I think we need to hear that today, because fear can play such a massive role in our lives, can't it? Have you ever experienced yourself dreaming a dream or feeling, especially the Holy Spirit within, kind of nudging you to step out in faith, to reach out to that person, to speak a word that you might feel that God had put within you for that person, or to maybe start something new, or to invite people over to your home to enjoy a meal and to open the Bible with them. I don't know if you've experienced God just putting a dream within you, only for fear then to stop you. Have you found that in your life? Fear can be, I think, our biggest hindrance and our greatest challenge as the church today. But if we hear these words here, see, fear, it's a natural thing, okay? God isn't calling us to be a people who are totally fearless, because I think that is pretty unrealistic, because I experience fear all the time. It is such a natural thing. But I think courage, and this is why I think it is the most important need within the church at the moment. Courage is a choice. Fear is natural. Courage is a choice. And courage is this choice that doesn't disregard the fear. It doesn't play down the fear. It doesn't say, okay, I'm going to just try and ignore the fear as much as I can. No, courage, it faces the fear, it acknowledges it, and then says, but there is something greater. There is something greater than the fear. Therefore, I must do. Now, my own story. I remember when I was in a rugby club up in Manchester, when I was living up there for university, and I was encouraged by a friend. I was having a few conversations with some guys I was playing rugby with about faith, and we were having some good chats and talking about deeper things, but never really getting on to anything like looking at Jesus or kind of really getting into the nitty-gritty of things. And I was feeling challenged and stirred, and one of my friends had been doing this in his own rugby club. He said, well, I've actually just started putting on evenings where we have dinner at my house and we look at stories of Jesus together. And he was like, you would never believe the way these guys were responding. And now I heard that from him and my heart just sank, because I was like, oh, sheesh. And if you guys know rugby boys, these were as rugby lads as they get. And I thought, surely not, God. Surely they would not want to know or look at these stories of you with me. And so I looked at that fear, and then I was reminded of the greater thing. The greater thing, Jesus invites anyone and everyone to experience real life. And this life is for them as well. And I might think that they are a million miles away, and yet what we see here, God's word, it will not return empty. There will be new life when we share his word. And so I stepped out. That fear didn't go away every week, as in it didn't go away. And yet guys started coming. And by the end of my 3 years at university, there were regularly 20 rugby boys coming over to my house, looking at the Bible together, talking about deeper things. And one of them particularly stands out. A guy that I'd completely written off. The guy I thought that had his life most together. Well, he told me, actually, when you sent the invitation to us on the WhatsApp group to read the Bible, what you didn't know was that week I had to stop my own housemate from taking his own life. My world was just a wreck. I just didn't know where to turn. And then you sent that invitation, and I've been hearing about Jesus, and he's making more and more sense to me every day. And now I had negotiated for God for that guy, and I said, no way would he want to know. And yet God just blew me away in that moment. We cannot be negotiating for him who hears and who doesn't hear the gospel. We've just got to take him at his word, that when it goes out, it will not return empty, will it? So I hope you feel courage rising within. Fear is natural, but courage is a choice. So imagine if we as the church became a courageous church. Imagine the impact we would have in our communities. Imagine the impact we could have on our co-workers or our neighbours or the people we do life with. Imagine if we were faithful with the invitation that we have received from God. As we finish, I think Moses or someone even quoted this verse here, and I wanted to finish with this. Paul writes to the Ephesians in Ephesians chapter 2 that we have been saved, we have been created, that we are God's handiwork, created to do the good works that God has prepared in advance for us to do. Do you realise that? God has created you, He has called you, He has saved you, He has invited you for the reason to accomplish the works that He has already prepared in advance for you to do. I find that amazing, really, to think about it. God has works for me to do. He has purposes for me. He has people for me. And this is what you need to know is that He has uniquely shaped you and wired you, the experiences you have, the story that He's written in your life to touch and transform certain people's lives. Do you see that? Your languages, and I know even in our story, I know my Welsh language means I've been called to a people group to go and take the gospel to them. To you is your experience, your background, yet who you are means you've been uniquely wired to reach a certain people. And just like, and I don't know if on your phone you've got that kind of unique touch ID, or they tend to be face ID these days, don't they? But in the same way that your touch ID is the way into your phone, I feel like God in this verse shows to us that you are uniquely made to touch and to enter into certain people's lives. There are some hands that only you can hold. There are some broken hearts that only you can heal, and there are some people only you can reach. You have been called in, and there's not some that have been called. Everyone is called to be a part of this. I think that is a phenomenal thing. And we're just going to enter now into a time of response. Thanks, I've gone on a little bit, but we're going to worship now. And this song, Oceans, really is all about what we've been talking about today. This invitation, to come out into the waters, to be refreshed ourselves, to experience life again. I don't know, you might be feeling empty today. You might be resonating with what we've heard today. Thirsty, poor, forgotten, abandoned, labouring for that which does not satisfy. God says, I'm inviting you in. And then for others of us as well, and in this song we're going to hear now as well. And it says, Spirit, lead me to walk upon the waters, where my trust is without borders. We're called to step out, aren't we? And that is scary. And yet, God is with us. So let's stand as we worship now. And in this time of response, just let God minister to you, and let Him affirm you.